A lot of folks, when they play a game of chess, say they just want to get a playable position. They don't want to worry about a lot of opening theory. They just want to get their pieces out and play a general game and be able to make decisions over the board. And that's not a bad idea. It works against a lot of players. However, when you try that against the super elite, the best of the best, it doesn't work out so well. Wolfgang Unziker tries that technique in this game against Bobby Fischer. Just get the pieces out and play a general game of chess, and we see very quickly why that does not work against a super elite player like Fischer. Unziker has white, Fischer has black. This was played at the Olympiad in 1962. Let us jump right in. E4 was the first move, and Fischer responds with the Sicilian, which should come as no surprise. Fischer almost always played the Sicilian against E4. Knight to F3, D6, and the open Sicilian is on the board. Fischer plays knight to F6 to put pressure on E4. So knight to C3 is played to defend the E4 pawn. And then Fischer plays A6, or the Najdorf Sicilian. That's the name of this line. And the move A6 basically is designed to keep a piece out of B5, but also play B5 himself to gain space on the queen side later. Bishop to E2 is played by Unziker, and there are many moves white can play. In fact, it's been said that any move that doesn't lose a piece is playable for white in this position. But Bishop E2 is a more positional approach, not the sharper lines that we see. He's just getting his pieces out, just developing his pieces. Karpov played this way, nothing wrong with it. And Fischer plays E5. What he's doing is he's gaining his own stake in the center. He doesn't want to have a disadvantage in space. So he plays E5, and with the tempo, kicks this knight out of the D4 square. The knight goes to B3, and here we see this D5 square. Now, in this structure, which is called the Boleslavsky structure, this D5 square is of paramount importance. Both sides want to control it. White wants to control it so that this D6 pawn stays fixed, and maybe white can plant a knight on this square later. Black wants to liquidate with D6, D5 at some point and end up with the only central pawn, the pawn at E5. So there's always a real big battle over that D5 square in these lines. Bishop to E6 from Fischer right away, putting pressure on that square. Castles, knight B to D7, and one of the ideas with this move is that the knight can go to B6 and contribute to the battle over D5 from that square. White plays F4, gaining space and with some potential for a kingside attack. The one problem with this move, though, he's got to worry about this E4 pawn, which can now no longer be defended with the pawn, and it can become a little sensitive. Queen to C7, not only keeping E5 under some defense, obviously it's already defended, but just adding to the defense of the E5 pawn. He also puts his queen on the half-open C file, and now when white plays F5, as he does in the game, Fischer can play bishop to C4 because the queen supports that bishop. And he'd be okay with making a trade there. Because after the trade, the queen would occupy this square and the pressure on E4 would begin to grow. So instead, Unziker plays A4, trying to limit Fischer's expansion with B7, B5 by keeping that square under control. Fischer couldn't play it at the moment because of this pin, but he wants to keep that the B5 push restrained. Bishop to E7, preparing castling. And now bishop to E3. White can also play A5 here, trying to clamp down on the B6 square, which he ends up doing anyway. But bishop to E3, controlling this key diagonal and adding some control to C5. Castles from Fischer, and then Unziker does play A5, clamping down on this B6 square. Now, Fischer can't allow that to continue to be a problem. You know, if Unziker was to even plant a knight here, that would be big trouble. So he goes ahead and plays B5 now, and knowing what Unziker is going to do, which is take that pawn en passant. And now Fischer recaptures with the knight. Now, he's isolated his A pawn, but he doesn't care so much. He's got these open lines on the queen side. That's what's important to him. And of course, this knight is now a contributor to controlling the D5 square, where he can maybe push it to D5 later. Now, there was an improvement on this position. I believe it was Geller who played king to H1. But here, Unziker plays bishop takes B6, which for the moment gives up a very nice bishop and the bishop pair, but it removes a key defender of D5. That's his idea, his thinking here. Queen takes bishop with check, so now the king moves to h1, and Fischer plays bishop to b5. If he takes on e2, this is just an equal position. But he plays bishop to b5, and his idea is, if allowed, is he'll move the bishop to c6 and put more pressure on that e4 pawn. So White really has to do something about that, and he goes ahead and takes the bishop, ab5, and now knight to d5. Now, visually, this looks like a pretty good situation for White. He's got the knight here. Now, obviously, Fischer can't allow it to stay there. He'll need to exchange it. But after knight takes d5, as happened in the game, queen takes d5, we see this bishop on e7. Now, this is a bad bishop because these two pawns block this bishop's mobility. They get in the way. However, there are other circumstances here that are more important, and that bishop can become active on another diagonal later. And Fischer's next move is very powerful, really strong. Rook to a4. Again, preparing all kinds of pressure on the queen side, using this pawn at b5 to support this rook. And White can't take that rook, because after pawn takes, it's kicking the knight away. And after the knight moves, the b pawn falls, and this a pawn is really going to be trouble for White. So c3 instead is played by Unziker. But now queen to a6, building up on this a file. h3, another possibility was rook a to d1, but then rook to c8, and if knight to c1, Fischer can break through with b4, a minority attack on the queen side, creating more weaknesses. After knight d3, pawn takes, pawn takes. Now, this game was actually, Fischer played this position against Mikhail Tal, I believe, a year earlier, and in that game, he played rook to a5, and after queen to b3, Tal was able to draw the position. But he said if he had just taken the pawn, then he would have been in very good shape and probably would have won this game. He's up a pawn here. A tactic like knight takes pawn doesn't quite work. It looks like it does. After pawn takes, you can't play queen to d8. It looks like there's a mate after bishop takes queen, rook takes bishop, a back rank mate. But what you do is you just tuck the bishop back to f8, and you would be safe. And after queen takes e5, bishop to b4, keeping the bishop on this diagonal so it can deal with back rank mates by going to f8. But that looks like it allows another tactic that Tal could play queen takes rook. Because now, if bishop takes queen, rook to d8 is mate. However, Fischer would not have taken the queen. Instead, would have played queen takes f1 check, drawing that rook away, and then bishop takes queen, and he would have been up a piece. So he had seen this position and knew some of the ins and outs of it already. But instead, Unziker plays h3, rook to c8, and we can see how Fischer's pieces, particularly his heavy pieces, are becoming very active here. Rook f to e1, adding a defender to the e4 pawn. h6, not only does that give his king some luft, so there's no back rank mates, it also allows this bishop sort of a perch that it can get on its most active diagonal. King to h2, bishop to g5, and notice how this bishop sort of dominates the knight. The knight doesn't have any comfortable place to go, at least where the bishop can't capture it. Here, queen to d3 was probably the best option for White, just sort of keeping the queen centralized. He played, though, g3. I think the concern, of course, is that the bishop's going to get on this f4 square and deliver check. But the problem is, after g3, this second rank becomes very weak, and Fischer immediately exploits that. First, he plays queen to a7, aiming at this f2 square. King to g2 is played by Unziker to keep the queen out. Seems reasonable. But now rook to a2, threatening to take on b2 with check. He's completely dominating and aiming at this rank here. Excuse me, get that back. If White takes the rook, then queen takes rook, and he's hitting this pawn, putting pressure on this knight. If rook to e2 to defend b2, then this shot, rook takes c3. And obviously you can't take, because queen takes rook would lead to a win for black. You could just check and win that pawn, and the queen bishop. There's no way white could survive. So instead, he plays king to f1. And now there's not a pin on this line. But this pawn can't be taken because Fischer would lose his queen. But Fischer plays rook takes c3. The same idea still works. Obviously, if the pawn takes the rook, then queen to f2 is checkmate as the rook supports the queen. But what if now rook takes a2? Then rook to f3 check works. After king to e2, rook to f2 check, king to d3, Fischer can then take the rook, and black's pieces are way too active for white to survive. His king is in the middle of the board, the b2 pawn is threatened, and that would be it. So after rook to takes c3, Unziker resigned. It's really amazing. He played such a solid opening. He played fairly sound moves, yet his position collapsed extremely quickly, losing with white, a grandmaster losing with white in 26 moves. Fischer, quite a genius. Thank you for joining us at Chess Dog. See you again soon.